Welcome back to Martins and More. My name's Maury Rutsch.
And I'm Spoon Phillips.
And this episode's brought to you by our Patreon members. Join our growing community for early access to every episode, exclusive video versions of the podcast, behind-the-scenes footage, full-length product demos, and more. We appreciate you. Today on Martins and More, we bring you part 2 of changes in Martin production over the years, more specifically, the D28. We join our program already in progress.
Let's kind of jump ahead to our era, the neck shapes that you're actually familiar with. How do you describe them when customers ask you about them who don't play Martins?
Well, going from 2003, when we became a Martin dealer up until last year when we ceased being a Martin dealer, I really got to know the modified V-neck, the low-profile neck, and then more recently, very recently, the modern deluxe necks. But I would basically cite the Mod V, something like an Eric Clapton or a CEO 7. I would say the low profile, which is really now is the OMJM John Mayer, the modified low oval, which seems to be on almost everything, and then the modern deluxe neck, which is a very, very sleek, almost has no shoulders to it. They're the four that I've gotten to know better than anything. And if you find any neck that's on a different guitar prior to 2003 and or something in a limited edition or a one-off, I wouldn't be able to speak that well about it. But I really do think that the modified V feels the most old-fashioned. If that's not a cop-out, that feels like it's a neck that has a lot more girth to it, and it's a handful for more players than others. The modified low oval just feels extremely easy to play for most people, and it's been a long time since we had customers in the store where I could actually have a chat with them while they're playing one guitar versus another and bounce ideas back and forth. How comfortably do you find this versus that? But even in conversations on emails and phone calls, most of our clientele who took the time to talk about liking and disliking necks had more issues with modified V-necks than anything else. And then fast forwarding to a few years back when Martin unveiled the Modern Deluxe series, except for a couple of forum posts when it was very, very brand new, some players cautioning others that were reading, be careful, it's a very, very skinny neck, you might not like it. Most of the people that I know that got to compare that with the modified low oval liked the Modern Deluxe neck a lot. So it's really the modified low oval took over everything in recent times, and it seems to be the neck that a lot of people can get along with. And it's not a surprise that Martin, over time, at least the time we've been a dealer, went away from 1 and 11/16 at the nut. They basically give you more room at the nut. They call it the high performance taper, which means it feels like a 1 3/4 inch nut in the first position, but it doesn't make you get progressively wider as you go towards the 12th fret. So the beginning of the neck at the cowboy chord still feels like 1 3/4, and it gradually goes away from that feel. That combined with the modified low oval seems to be, not only is it the most popular from my memory, but Martin's actually been on record to say they decided to make that standard because when custom shop orders would come through, the overwhelming majority of people who were designing their own custom guitars asked for that neck. So when you have the ability to say to Martin, I'm going to pick which neck this gets, they were basically blown away by how many people, unanimous isn't the right word, but nearly unanimous, said that's the neck I want. And Martin thought, well, why shouldn't we just put that on everything going forward, or almost everything? So that's, I have a hard time just elaborating on what I think a neck feels like, but I can certainly say that much as from the point of a dealer who was connecting customers with guitars, and with the risk of accepting returns, the neck that's on the modified low oval neck seems to be extremely popular, and I don't see it slowing down.
Yeah, and it was very gratifying for Tim, certainly. I think Tim Teal, he was happy about that because he felt it was something that it was a truly Martin invented neck shape. And when Martin had come out with the low profile, and now we're jumping ahead, but we'll come back to this. Right now we're just talking purely about necks. Came out with the low profile in 1985, and similar to some of these necks, they didn't immediately put everything in low profile. They came out with the P models that said like D28P that had the what was I can't remember what the P stood for then. I'm sorry, was it T for technology or was P for, I think it was T. I think it was actually D28 T for technology, had the technology neck. I don't remember now. But
I think it was P.
Yeah, I think it was P, and I can't remember why they called it P. I can't remember what it stood for, but it didn't stand for performance. I know that. But it's because they were this was the first time they were trying an adjustable neck rod. So again, 1930s starts out with an ebony truss rod. Before 1930, there's plenty of Martins that are made with no neck rod at all. And they come out with the ebony neck rod and we use that on the 14 frets, changed to steel, so clearly the extra string tension of the 14 fret long scale, particularly the long scale necks that they're using. For a long time, the 12 fret triple O was the only long scale Martin you got. The Dreadnoughts had long scale, and for a very long time, those were the only long scale things. When they went to the 14 frets, that auditorium size, aka triple knot, aka triple O, was long scale. And then they decided to change the triple O's to short scale, brought them down in line with the double O and O. And probably, again, because the string tension was probably causing warranty issues with them. And that a lot of Martins from that era survive with flat tops and don't have big bulbous tops, but they clearly thought it was, there was a reason they did it. So then the Dreadnought was the only long scale guitar after that. And so you come all the way up through the 1960s. You come up to, the Beatles famously get their D28s in time to record the White Album. You couldn't buy American guitars. There were embargoes on American musical instruments in those days in Britain. And you had to come to America to get them. So, eventually that changed. But it's one of the reasons they had a sort of a mythical quality, the way that Coors beer did back when you couldn't get it in the East, east of the Mississippi. So you got up through the era where Joni Mitchell did, D28. Just about anybody you can think of has a D28. There were a few cool cats who had pre-war D28s or earlier D28s, people like Steve Stills and people like that who understood the appeal to the old 1930s. But for them, and they even by then, the aura of early pre-war D28s was showing up. And in 1966, Martin came out with a new Dreadnought that was different than any previous or current Dreadnought, and two important reasons. And can you think of what was the Dreadnought that came out in 1935 that cost more than the D28 and that they were trying to promote as their new flagship model?
You say 1935?
No, 1966. I'm sorry. That's a total giveaway. There's a I don't know what you would call that, but yeah, what would it give?
Freudian slip.
1966. What came out in 1966?
Let me think back to some of the numbers I just spat out. I want to say two things. First of all, D35, because I think I know this part of the history better than some others. But if I could wheel back just 2 seconds and make this long episode even longer for no good reason, you were talking about Coors being not available on the East Coast. Are you telling me, and this isn't a bit, I want to know, are you telling me the movie Smokey and the Bandit was factual?
I'm afraid I don't remember the reference.
I saw that a few months ago. The plot of it was they have to get
Coors.
this beer.
Oh, they have to
from
go
there
get...
I don't know if it was Coors, but it was a big thing where they have to get this truckload of beer across the country at a certain time. Was that really a thing?
I'm sorry, you said Coors. I thought you said Pearl, and I thought you were going back to the World War II abalone thing. Yeah, it was totally a big thing. Olympia and Coors, they were the two famous ones. Blitz
Really?
Weinhard, there were these beers out there. They're not pasteurized. So there were states where you couldn't go across state lines or certain state lines with pasteurized beer. And it wouldn't last as long.
Wow.
It supposedly would spoil quicker when you were shipping it, and people tried to refrigerate it in airplane, all this nonsense. And it was a big deal. People would come back from Colorado with Coors, and that was a big gift for people. Wow. And I think it was an Emperor's New Clothes thing. People just were told it was great, so it was great. And it was just as vapid and uninteresting as it is today. I'll just tell
Does it
you.
make you want to watch that movie?
I drink. I like when people say you're a beer snob. This is a tangent. When people say you're a beer snob, I say no, not at all. Beer is a brewed malt beverage flavored with hops, brewed in England by Englishmen. There's nothing snobby about that. But the first time I had a Coors Light, I was playing a show, maybe a 4th of July show, in fact, in Williamsburg at this reconstructed gas like car repair place called The Garage, I think. And they had like bleachers, and I had performed in the first half of this show, and so I was up in the bleachers, and it was whatever holiday it was. There was no place to buy beer. They ran out of beer, and they had to go find a place to buy beer, and all they could find was Coors Light, and they filled up the trash cans with Coors Light. And somebody brought me one of these trash can beers, Coors Light, and I opened it, and I started drinking it, and I honestly thought, oh my God, there was a hole in this can, and it filled up with water from the trash can. Because it tasted like a can that had water in it that used to have beer in it.
Wow. Well, it was. It's a Coors Light.
But anyway, D35 is the answer. What's unique about the D35, especially back then?
Well, the D35 has two things that are very, very, unique to itself. It's the 3-piece back and the 1/4-inch bracing on a guitar that big. And I wanted to, I'd like to ask you at this point.
What kind of 1/4-inch bracing?
As far as its location?
No, what's different about? What's the difference between the HD and the D35 today?
Oh, I'm sorry. It was 1/4-inch non-scallop bracing.
That's right. And of course, in those days, everything was non-scallop. And the reason they did this was twofold. The 3-piece back, they had all this glorious Brazilian rosewood that was too big to make a full-size dreadnought back, so they started making the 3-piece back, which everybody for years said made it sound bassier, but it's not why it sounded bassier. The D35 had 1/4-inch bracing. People were asking Mr. Martin to do that vintage Martin sound, and they wanted to make it more resonant without having to relearn how to do scallop bracing and go through the expensive process of scalloping bracing on all these guitars. So they used 1/4-inch bracing, and they used what he called 00 size bracing. So Fred Martin put the 00 size bracing on the top and the bottom, and in those days the back bracing was also smaller on a 00. Today all dreadnoughts have that back bracing, but back then the D35 was the first one, and that's why you got the bassier, woofier sound of a D35, was the non-scallop 1/4-inch bracing with whatever the width of the back bracing was. And the D28 stayed the D28 with 5/16-inch bracing. And you get up into 1970, Brazilian rosewood goes away, so they convert to Indian rosewood, and then you get what other people feel is yet another classic D28 with a classic D28 sound. It's got a big, late 60s, they did the big rosewood bridge plate. And again, I think, as a cost-cutting measure to use up all this bridge plate, rosewood that they had, but then they went back to the maple bridge plate. Certainly by the time the HD28 came out, you have a maple bridge plate and scallop, and the first time since the 30s, the D28 got scallop bracing with the HD28, which is called HD because it's
herringbone. And I wondered, you were talking about using all the extra parts to make a rosewood bridge plate. Did they ever consider going around with those pencils they found in the trash and making bridge plates out of that?
Or nuts, at least. I've seen guitars that had a pencil for the nut. So,
that would be cost cutting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who had that. It was an electric guitar, but you could clearly see the number 2, graphite in the center of it. Yeah, yeah.
Nice. So the HD28, what year was that? Or am I asking the right question at the wrong time?
76. I should have looked it up. I don't remember. It was the 1970s when it first came out. And they gave you the smaller maple bridge plate and scallop bracing. And the HD28 was more than the D28 and still had the dot fretboard. They basically were identical except for those two things. And they're clearly the resonance that you get from scallop bracing. To me, I would call a natural reverb. There's a more resonant quality, echoey quality to it that makes it sound, I guess, more expansive. Scallop bracing started coming back with the first batch of OMs that Eric Schoenberg ordered talked Fred Martin into making in 1969. And then they started putting out OMs here and there. Dave Bromberg brought his F-style Martin archtop that had been retopped into a flat top by Matt Umanoff and brought it to Fred Martin and said, "You should be making these." And that's where the M's came from, as you certainly know. You've been and so those had scallop bracing as well, but scallop bracing was still not on the dreadnoughts or the triple O's until the HD came out. No scallop bracing on the dreadnoughts or on the D18 until well into the 20th century. D45 didn't go to scallop bracing immediately. The new D45s that came out in '69 and the D41s had non-scallop bracing at first, and then also converted to scallop bracing. So scallop bracing was taking over, and the V-neck came out with the Clapton models. There were some vintage reissue things that had V-necks and herringbone and scallop bracing, and those led to the vintage series. And so what was that? The vintage series was around when you became a dealer. So how did they sell? Like how did the D18 V sell compared to the regular D18 in your memory?
Oh, much, much better. I mean, the vintage series altogether was really, really popular. We did really well with the HD28V, the D18V, the OM28V. I don't know if you've seen that model. I like that model a little bit. That worked out pretty well. I became an owner of an OM28V, as you know, in 1998, and so I basically got to know that guitar for quite a while before I became a dealer. So 1998, I get my OM28V, and I got to know that guitar all through the years, and we didn't become a Martin dealer till '03. So by the time we really had an opportunity to decide what to stock, some of it's emotional, some of it's more of it was emotional than as far as the numbers, but it really wasn't hard to see that the vintage series was really doing well. And Spoon can correct me in a few minutes if I'm wrong, but I do think the vintage series was a way to offer modern customers the guitars made the way they used to be made, not nearly to the degree of the authentic series, which comes up later in this episode, but the vintage series, the D18V, I couldn't feel wrong to say that it outsold the D18 2 or 3 to 1. It wasn't really even close. The HD28V versus the HD28 was a much smaller gap, but something like a D18V, or you don't remember the D18VS, the 12-fret version of it, those guitars did really, really well. Matter of fact, one of my best memories of any Martin Fest was Daryl, I forget his last name now, an HD28 VS with medium strings dropped down a whole step. I just get chills remembering how big that sound was. Like unfair.
Yeah.
Everybody's taking their turn playing a guitar, and it was his song, and it just, your hair flew back a little bit and your shoulders hurt. But yeah, we talked a few minutes ago about you can make the guitar sound bassier by doing certain things. That guitar had all those things, and then when you drop from standard tuning to detune by a half step or a whole step, the more you detune can also result in a bass, some extra girth. And it's just like, metal music when you're chugging on E, and then some people are dropped down lower than that, and somebody got the idea, let's drop down to low B and add a seventh string. It's that whole kind of exercise where you're taking whatever resonant voice is in a guitar and you're bringing the cellar lower and lower and lower, and the volume doesn't go away, but the part of the voice that has all the power just goes towards bass guitar territory. And I've not being much of a bass player, I don't know why I like bass so much, but that guitar was awesome.
Yeah, they were pretty tremendous, and like the strong man of the circus. Yeah, that's the other thing too. The Martin did bring back the 12-fret dreadnought and the maybe 59, I don't remember. They didn't make very many of them. Probably the most famous one was Peter Yarrow's D28 S, and the S only started being used in the 1960s. S did not mean it referred to the standard body shape, but it wasn't used. That's why the 0028 was a 12-fret guitar that wasn't a 0028S. They didn't use the S until 1960s. And when they came out with the D35, they also came out with the D35S. And when they came out with the D45, they also started making a D45S, but those were pretty rare. But then, and these are, we're mainly talking about the main catalog models. They definitely have certain special models that were starting to come out in the 70s and 80s and onward. We're focusing primarily on this, what eventually became the series. So you have the vintage series where you got that 12 fret D28 VS, V referring to the vintage series, and also the V neck really. And it did not have a 1 7/8 inch neck width. It had a 1 13/16 neck width. So the neck wasn't nearly as mammoth as you got in the old days, the pre-1930s Martins. But the S guitars from the 60s do have a 1 7/8 inch width. And those are a handful for sure. But then, so the vintage series is very popular. Vintage series, you had the herringbone returns, the diamonds and squares fretboards returns, the grained ivory binding returns, open back tuners return. You get the aging toner or vintage toner, as they called it back then. That, pumpkin orange, some people called it, though, and that stuck around on the Claptons for a while. They've still toned it down on the Clapton models now, but that basically were identical to real 30s Martins. That's where the color came from. But still Sitka, still Indian rosewood, but forward shifted scallop bracing, V-neck, the 1 11/16 inch V-neck. So you're talking about the neck from the 1941, 1939 onward. And it was modernized. It wasn't, they called it a modified V because it wasn't as thick, particularly up where the heel is. And the heels matter. The heel translates all the way down the neck, that thickness, because it's relative to it as it's getting narrower and shallower. So you have all of this stuff, except you still have Brazilian rosewood. You have all these vintagey features, but still Sitka, still Indian rosewood, still a 1 11/16 inch neck. People start clamoring for the 1 3/4 inch vintage necks and clamoring for Adirondack spruce. And plenty of independent builders out there are beginning to build 30s style Martins more meticulously. The Martins building them. So they come out with the Golden Era series, and the GEs have Adirondack spruce. The D28 Golden Era has Brazilian rosewood. The OM 28 Golden Era has Brazilian rosewood. But they still had a modified V-neck. They didn't have the 30 style heel. The first true 30 style heel was the OM 18 GE. That was one where the dealer in Philadelphia, Fred Oster, he had a 1930 OM 18 that they built, based it on. That's the first time they really kind of tried to base something on one particular Martin, at least in terms of the neck shape. And he kept saying, no, it's not right. No, it's not right. No, it's not right. The irony is it's got one of the pointiest V-necks of any Martin that I've ever played. And the 1930s V-necks typically aren't very pointy in that they don't have the pup tent neck to them, but that model certainly does. But then the Brazilian rosewood crisis hits. Its availability gets into all kinds of legal issues, and Martin says that's it for Brazilian rosewood. We're getting out of the Brazilian rosewood business again. And they come out with the Marquis series, which, at least at first, were identical to the Golden Era D28 Marquis, same as the D28 Golden Era, except Indian rosewood instead of Brazilian. And those are spectacular guitars, really powerful, forward-shifted, scallop bracing, small maple bridge plate, Golden Era scalloping, which has more wood removed from it. They take more time to make them more flexible. And then they start making the authentics. The original authentics were not based on one particular instrument like the modern authentics were. They focused the D28 authentic on the 1937 D28s that they had access to in terms of how the bracing were scalloped. And now you finally come back to tucked bracing and hide glue. The first modern Martin with hide glue and tucked bracing was the original D28 authentic. They came out with the 18, they came out with the 45, the 000 18 as well. Ironically, they never made a 000 18 in the vintage series or in the Marquis series. They only made the 0018V, which is a very popular guitar. And they had also come out with the 000 42, but that really was just the Eric Clapton model without his signature and with the modern style 42 Pearl. So now you got up into their first authentic series, and they're finally returning to Brazilian rosewood, Adirondack spruce, with the real way they made the bracing, as close as they could get it at the time. But they just went out of their way. Dave from Brothers Music, Dave Strunke was on the original team that made the original, developed the D18 authentic, and he talked about how some of the first batches, the binding was a little wider than it was, so they definitely started narrowing it down and trying to get these authentics just right. People love those authentic models. Then the authentic models kind of went away and came out with the modern authentic series, where they took one particular Martin guitar that had to be in all original shape, and that included a 1931 12-fret D28 and a 1937 D28 that was considered one of the best sounding Martins ever made, 1939 D18, and a very unusual 1936 D45 that had an extra wide top, and actually it had extra wide depth, so they didn't keep that part of it. And they took them to the Smithsonian Institute, put them through CAT scans, X-rays, really primarily focusing for the thickness of certain things, like the thickness of the fretboard and that sort of thing, thickness of the bridge wings. But primarily they wanted to get the bracing exactly where it was on the old timers. A lot of people complained that they didn't use the exact body shape to the silhouette, which they've now changed, and the modern D28 authentic, it finally has the exact body shape of a 1937 D28.
And it's only different by that much too. It's so funny.
Yes, and right along the waist, where the waist comes down, it's just slightly different. I think it looks more different to the naked eye than it really is when you compare. And I actually have those comparison silhouettes. I have a copy of those. They sent me that, or I got them at the factory that shows all that comparison stuff. But yeah, so there, we have a lot of D28s we haven't talked about that are signature models, and other interesting models that have D28 in them that have slight changes to them. But that kind of takes us up to the modern era, which ironically goes all the way back to the 1930s, where they now try to make, we didn't even talk about them using torrefaction on the authentics to try to artificially age or they say naturally accelerate the age of the spruce on the bracing and the spruce on the top. And that definitely has an effect on the openness of a brand new guitar. They didn't have those on the original authentics. That was part of the new authentic series, where they meticulously, and I don't think it even happened. It wasn't even on the original, that one, the D28 1941, and those did not have the torrefaction. That was a year or two later. This is the year that they came out with the OM 45 Deluxe 1930 that they added the torrefaction.
Wasn't there a time where you can get a certain D28 with or without VTS? That was pretty crazy too. Yeah.
Yeah. And both the 1937 and 1941 with the rear shifted bracing and the 1/11/16 inch. If I didn't already have a fantastic Brazilian rosewood dreadnought that Strunken and his partner Rich put together for me with a 1930s top on a 1960s body, I would have bought the 1941 with the rear shifted and though mine's got forward shifted, and I love it. But that brings us up into the 20th century, and all this time we haven't talked about really the modern D28 versus the modern HD28. So that's ironically that takes us back, and also they made a bunch of changes to the standard series. And the first guitar that they made the change to, was it the 0018 before the D28 was changed?
Yep. Okay. The D18 and the 0018 were reimagined, for lack of a better term, in I think 2012.
Okay, so they knew that the standard D18, the standard 0018, did not sell very well. They had non-scalloped 5/16 inch bracing, Sitka spruce and mahogany, and they looked staid. They had that what was once classic Martin look of black binding and black pickguard that they went with in 1966 and got rid of herringbone. They were boring. They sold well overseas, but only because they cost a lot less than the D28s. And overseas, Martins cost in those days a lot more than they cost domestically. So they said, in the words of somebody who I won't mention at Martin, they were obviously broken and needed to be fixed. And what they did is they basically took the D18 from the vintage series with its four-shifted scallop bracing and all its vintage looks and toner change and all that stuff, and they put it on the D18 and got rid of the V-neck. And voila, we had the new D18. And there wasn't a triple O 18 in the vintage series, but they took the basically the specs of the 0028, including the quarter-inch bracing, and put it on a triple O size body and invented the new triple O 18. And they were hugely popular. And so they said, okay, what are we going to do about this? Well, to my great surprise, the next thing they did was revamp the venerable D28. And instead of putting the herringbone and the forward-shifted scallop bracing on it, they kept, they added some vintagey things, but they kept this, what had been the standard D28 from about 1946 up. Major differences were they had a low-profile neck with an adjustable rod by that time, the adjustable rod coming out in 1985, and that's when the low-profile neck showed up. But otherwise, it looked and to a great degree sounded like your granddad's 1950s or 1960s D28 because of the non-scallop, non-forward-shifted bracing. But so what did they do to reimagine the D28?
2012, they fixed the 0018 and the D18, but it took them until 2017 to reimagine the D28. So just picture, I would have to imagine after they had the success of the 18s, that whoever was in charge of that went back to the meeting and said, okay, let's do it to something else. Let's do it to the D28. There must have been so much back and forth on, you can't touch the D28, don't you dare, to, whoa, you couldn't touch the D18 or the 0018, but once we did, it completely got fixed. But to answer your question, the D28 got forward shifted non-scallop bracing. It got a 1 3/4 inch nut. It got I get mixed up by saying antique toner or vintage, like a darker looking top. And it got the, I guess, antiqued white binding along with some butterbean open back tuners. So it became old looking, and the bracing went from being non-scalloped standard position to non-scallop forward shifted. It still did not get the scallop bracing treatment, but it got improved. And I said this the week we saw our first one. I said this a couple years later, and I'll still say it now. I really, really do appreciate the sound of the D28 post 2017 much better than its predecessor. And that's at the end of this show. We probably should collect some thoughts, but the D28 becoming reimagined, that's what you got. That's the difference you saw.
It was interesting, the hoopla around the fanfare at the time. And I was surprised that they did it. I thought for sure they were going to do what they did with the D18. They were going to retire the D28 entirely. They were going to take the HD28V. H for herringbone also meant you got scallop bracing, but they're going to take the vintage series D28 and they're going to get rid of the V-neck and call it the D28 and get rid of the H altogether. And they did not do that. But of course, I didn't realize they were getting close to doing the entire standard series over. You have to remember that between those two dates, they came out with that entire new series with that entire new body shape. They came out with the Performing Artist series, and so there were a lot of their energies were into futuristic stuff, and they with the Performing Artist neck and all that. And I had said something about that neck that Tim was quite pleased when they converted the D28 and then converted and the 18 and all that to the modified low oval. It was because it was a Martin invented neck shape, where the Performing Artist neck shape was trying to copy the Taylor neck and appeal to, young electric guitarists who want an electric guitar feel to their neck shape. And he was happy that he feels like the forming artist shape, while popular and still used on certain Martin models, it wasn't really an acoustic guitar neck shape, in his opinion, where the modified lobe oval was. And so, but obviously, regardless of what the old gripers on web forums and stuff were saying about it, the fact is, yes, they antique white binding was new. They got rid of the grain ivoryoid, which I think probably was a cost decision. It's probably cheaper. But what it does is it makes it look like a very late 40s, because of the tuning machines. Makes it look like a late 40s D28 or a 50s D28. I don't remember when the closed back tuners came out that they still use on the D35. But obviously it was a huge success. It was still cheaper than, than other fancier Martins. It clearly was a huge success. And so immediately afterwards, they decided to bring out the whole new reimagined standard series where everybody got forward shifted bracing, whether you had non-scallop bracing in the D35 and the D28 or scallop bracing like you had on all the other dreadnoughts. And even the GPC models started out with one model, the 28, had non-scallop bracing, and that didn't sell very well, though I loved how it sounded. But then it flipped and had, the forward shifted scallop bracing like everybody else. And the rest is history. And I think the amazing thing about that is they had the authentic series. They really went back to the 30s. They have the standard series where they brought the 30s vintage look into the standard series, giving it even to the D35 and D28 in terms of the toner and the tuners.
Yeah.
And then they go and come out with the modern Deluxe series. They're taking the wheel all the way back to the 1930s, and then they're bringing it out with a unusual combination of vintage looks and certain vintage things, but with all this amazing modern cutting-edge technology that they had developed in their research and development department over the years. And finally had put some of this stuff on various special models, limited editions, but then they came out all together with the Modern Deluxe series. And you're much more expert on the Modern Deluxe series than I am, so you take over, and I'll drink.
You'll drink to that. The Modern Deluxe series, in my opinion, really, boy, this is going to invite flames, but it really takes what's great about the standard series and makes it even better. And I really will go on record to say that every single Modern Deluxe guitar I've tried does sound better, more resonant, more lively than the standard series model that it's based on. So when you take something like a standard series Martin guitar and Modern Deluxe it, what you're getting is gold hardware, gold tuners, gold Evo fret wire. You're getting a VTS Sitka top. You're getting wood binding. You're getting a bridge plate that's a sandwich of carbon fiber on the outside and a VTS Adirondack center. So I can't, with one hand, I really can't do it, but this is the carbon fiber, and I'll leave this finger with these two to say that's the Adirondack spruce in the center. And you're also getting, there's one more. Oh yeah, a really light, depending on which year you're getting a titanium truss rod or a lightweight steel truss rod, and depending on when this episode airs and what Martin's doing, that could be a little bit changed. They came out originally with a titanium truss rod, but then they went to steel, having some trouble sourcing that. But when you take a look at or listen to a Modern Deluxe guitar, in my honest opinion, something that sounds great about a 0018, for example, it's just, I don't know how to say this without being honest about it. It just sounds more awake. It's when the effort you're putting towards playing something on a standard series gives you back this much. The Modern Deluxe gives you back that much. It's just a more alive sound to me. And what do they say, that comparison is the thief of joy? If you play a regular D28, who could argue with how great that sounds when you pair it up against a D28 Modern Deluxe? The times I have, I really do like the Modern Deluxe better. And probably the elephant in the room that I probably should have said at first, the other thing that I forgot to mention about the upgrade on a a modern deluxe, maybe upgrade's the wrong word, a much, much different neck. Spoon, can you speak to that, where the neck on the modern deluxe versus a regular standard series instrument?
I can. We'll talk about the neck, but there's also the unusual combination, like I said, of vintagey features. One of those features is the bracing has golden era style bracing. So it's not tucked bracing like the Authentics, and it's not hand scalloped all the way down to the fretboard, to the soundboard like you get on the Authentic series. But it still has the golden era shaping. It's also Adirondack spruce, and I think golden era shaping was designed to, because Adirondack spruce has more strength to it across the cross grain than that, so it's more rigid, and so it helps loosen it up. But it's also VTS, vintage tone system, for people not familiar with that. It's their catchphrase or branded name of their version of torrefaction, where they bake the wood in a oxygen-free kiln way beyond it would normally incinerate, and it changes the molecular structure of the wood, so it behaves much more like wood that's 70, 80 years old. That's one of the odd combinations of modern technology and vintage-ized tonal enhancement, and the other is that neck. The neck was inspired by the neck on the OM 45 from 1930 in the Martin Museum. That's still my all-time favorite guitar neck. And it is shallower than most 1930s necks, even though it's a little thicker at the heel than you get in the modern deluxe. It's super, super comfortable. It's got this almost diabolical carve to it so that the apex of the V drifts from when you're down. Let me get on camera for people who can see. So here I am playing the F chord and my thumb's wrapping up around the V neck of a guitar that's got a V neck. And as I slide it up the neck, my wrist has to turn like this until it's parallel with the floor as I get up to about the 6th, 7th, 8th fret, and until you get all the way up into your body, where your wrist shape is very different from when it's way down at the nut. And the apex of the V, which is actually very shallow, fits right in here the entire time, no matter where you put your hand. It's a remarkable thing, and it's a secret to the vintage Martins that a lot of people had forgotten about. It's one of those things that people didn't even realize. And I was actually there when they discovered that on that guitar, when they were making the Authentic model, and they put a contraption on it that gave you a reverse 3D impression of the shape of that neck, and then stuck out the top, showed you that shape. And when they put it in different places, it was amazing, first of all, how lopsided it was, how there was more meat on the bass side than the treble side, but also how that V drifted. And so that's what it's based on. And even though it is shallower, much more modern, like you said, it has almost no shoulders to it at all. And I love it. I think it's one of the most comfortable things. If I ever got another vintage custom Martin, I would get that neck shape for it. And it's different than the S models. The S models the SC models have took that idea and even did a more unusual helix neck to it, but same idea. That flips the meat from the bass to the treble side. I mean, it literally flips it. So when you're up to play solos, you're up there, you have more meat to hang on to, and you're down here, you have less meat, and it makes it easier to grasp, and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, the modern deluxe neck. I don't know anybody who doesn't like it. I can know people that dislikes it. There may be people who say, no, I actually prefer this neck or that neck. But most people that I've ever talked to love the neck on their modern deluxe Martins. Really super, super cool. And also the fretboard's thinner. The fretboard has the same thickness that you get on the Authentic series. So it's the 1930s, and that helps. Helps with the resonance. I think particularly because there's less wood. It's a good idea. I think you get the resonance of the neck. It's really important when you have a true dovetail neck joint. There's a lot of resonance transference from the neck into the body, into the neck block, and into the body. And so I think between the smaller, narrower truss rod and the shallower bridge plate, it all helps make that guitar super resonant, like you said, super live. But it's a combination of all those things. They come with the liquid bridge pins. You didn't even mention that. That definitely, they have the scientific proof that increases the volume and sustain of the initial note played. It doesn't increase sustain in terms of its ringing, fading stuff that certainly the VTS helps with in the GE bracing, and possibly the bridge plate. But I think the bridge plate and the pins, they allow more energy to come through, and there's less dampening. In fact, they say scientifically, liquid metal, there's zero dampening. The energy passes right through it. So that initial note, when you play that initial note, it keeps its volume, not only has increased volume, it keeps its volume a little longer before that fades out. But, and I know Marshall's a big fan of the Modern Deluxe series, and we wanted to end on that high note of how the D28 has changed from the first D28 in 1931, the first 14-fret D28 in 1934, first D28 with non-scallop bracing and 46 on up to today's D28, and then the D28 Modern Deluxe, which is another adoration of the D28.
Better. All right, now the most important question here. Do you want to answer a very important question of mine, or do you want to ask me 20?
I think it's time that I ask you 20 questions, and then we'll turn and close out with our discussion of how Martin production of the D28 has changed over the years. So,
fair enough.
I have to think of a Martin guitar that's available today for sale, and Maury has to guess through asking 20 questions what that is. He gets 3 guesses as to what model I might be referring to, but those guesses count toward the 20 questions. And now I have to put on my thinking cap of what am I going to come up with.
There's your thinking cap.
There it is. Now, I could be obvious. I have it in my mind, a Martin guitar that's available for sale today. And 20 questions are on the clock now.
Am I allowed to put on my answering cap?
Please do. Very good.
Is this guitar a D28?
No. That's one model guess.
Is this model made in Mexico?
No, that's 2 guesses and 2 no's.
Is this a dreadnought?
No, that's 3 guesses and 3 no's.
Is this guitar long scale?
No, that's 4 guesses and 4 no's.
Is this guitar a 0018?
That's 5 guesses, 2 model guesses, and 5 no's.
Oh, I spent 2 model guesses already. It's been such a long time. I'm rusty. Oh, that sucks. Only 1 left.
Lisa, that's not very polite.
Does this guitar have rosewood back and sides?
It does. That is your first yes in 6 questions.
Did Martin make this guitar before 2000?
That's a very good question. I'm going to say that's a no. So I'm pretty sure that's a no in 7 questions.
Is this guitar extremely similar to a 0028, yet a little bit smaller?
That's your third win and 5 losers. How's that for rudeness? 5 loser answers and 3 wins, and that's a yes.
Does this guitar have herringbone?
That's a yes. So there you go. You're 9 questions in. You have 1 guess. So do you want to flip a coin?
Can you tell that I'm pretty sure I know what this is, but I'm afraid to waste my last guess?
Yes, that's a yes. That's 10 questions. So much for your record.
Is this guitar better? Not better. Is this guitar bigger than an O 14 fret?
See, there you go. There you go with your judgy. That's awfully judgy. But the answer is yes. It's bigger than a 14 fret O.
Is it a 14 fret instrument?
It is. You're up to 12 questions.
Is this guitar a rosewood version of a 0018?
Well, I'd have to say no, because there's a lot of differences between a rosewood a 0018 other than rosewood. They don't make 0021s anymore, so.
Okay, is this guitar a 0028?
I hate to disappoint you, but yes, it is a 0028. Mentioned briefly when I said Martin had never made a 14 fret 0028 all the way up through their history. They made almost none of them until they came out with the modern standard series 0028. I'm kind of glad I went with that, because I almost went with the 028. But then you got to that 028 question earlier than you got to if I'd said no. That would have.
I really thought you might go D28 or D18, and once you didn't do that, I was on my own. So.
I was tempted saying, okay, what's the most obscure D28 that's for sale right now that I could come up with, just to stay with the theme? But there aren't enough. So
yeah,
I would have gone with the 28 authentic. Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. I could have gone with the D28, not Street Master. What do they call them?
Street Legend.
Street Legend. Thank you. See, but I couldn't have thought of that at the time. But yeah, the Street Legend, that would have been a good one.
Well, Rich Robinson would have been a good one too, if that's still alive.
Oh, well, I was thinking about that too. I think Rich Robinson's very cool guitar. For people who are not familiar with it, it is the first time they've done sort of the authentic treatment, where they took Rich Robinson's D28 that had belonged to his father. And am I remembering? It's in 1956. And they kind of did the authentic treatment to it, not exactly to the same degree, but it's got a honking big full thickness neck to it, for people who like those necks, and handful. But I tell you, the thickness of the neck, I think, helps with the rip-roaring sound that thing has. I think it just sounds fantastic cannon of a guitar.
And rear-shifted braces, right?
That's right, rear-shifted braces. So very cool.
All right. Well, if you guys are still with us, I want to thank you for hanging around. This has been a long one. I want to thank our pal Marshall again for the great show suggestion. The changes in Martin production over the years, with D28 being our guinea pig or our test subject. I want to thank him again for all of his support, and thank you guys for your support. Thank you very much to our patrons. We really, really appreciate you guys. It's no joke. We like to be funny through this whole podcast, but something that's not funny is your support for us. We really do appreciate it. I have one major question for Spoon before this program's over, and I hope you guys will answer the same thing in the comment section if you're watching the YouTube version. Spoon, we've talked about the very first D28. We talked about the Modern Deluxe. We looked at everything in between, how many changes came and went. Spoon Phillips, which D28 is the real D28?
Well, that, of course, is anybody's guess. I would say my D28 is the pre-imagined D28 with the non-scalloped standard shifted bracing. I owned one. My friend owned one. I still get to see it regularly when I am rehearsal with this guy. I still love the very clean, clear. It still has the rosewood complexity, but it's really nicely focused bass. So it pops out in playing. I think the bassier version that we have today, I bet you 9 times out of 10, people played them or heard them with blindfold on would pick the modern one. My hands, the arthritis I have in my hands now from my old injuries, does not like the modified low oval neck. It definitely hurts it. I can't play those necks for very long, and that limits me in terms of the modern Martins. But I will stick with them. I think that is still the real D28, even though it's more like a D28 from the late 40s and 50s than it is from the 30s in terms of all that bracing, except it's not. It's got the forward shifted bracing. They never did that before. It's new, and it's very cool. Clearly, very popular. People go into stores and play them and walk out with them. So I'm hedging it that way. I consider myself having a D28, even though the top was remade by two former Martin employees and put on a 1960s. They put on a modern neck for me with the low profile. That's and with a 1/11/16 inch nut. That's what my hands want. So that's my D28. Let me throw it right back at you, Mr. Diplomat. What is the D28?
Well, from where I came from, playing guitar since the 80s, playing Martin guitars since the mid-90s, and really not being interested in dreadnought guitars as a player until very, very recently. My angle is I'm looking at this guitar, and when you ask me, what do I think the D28 is, my mind goes to the pre-2017 D28 from the, I guess, 70s, 80s, 90s, only because as somebody who's followed Martin guitars a long time, selling Martin guitars as a dealer from 2003 until 2023, the D28 for such a long stretch was always the right before the change in 2017 is the way I knew it. 2017 is still a D28, but if you ask me to tell somebody when you go back and look at this whole lineage, which one is the real D28, I would say right before 2017. And one more quick cheat code before this is over. It went all the way back into the early 60s. Am I right there?
No, I would say I would take it all the way back to 1946. I mean, in 1946,
46.
Yeah, I would say 1940. Yeah, because you can't go back before 69 if you think Brazilian rosewood is too important. But 46 was when they switched to true non-scallop bracing. No, I beg your pardon, because they were still rear shifted then. So I would say 1960 is when that's when they have the modern X-brace position. And Sitka spruce. So other than Brazilian rosewood, I'd say 1960. It goes back to 1960. The next sticker, you have a blip period into the early 70s with a rosewood bridge plate. But I would still say, okay, 1960 is how far back that model goes.
Well, there you have it. That's the real D28 from me, from Spoon. And if you guys haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. Find us over on Patreon. And want to thank all of you guys for all the support. From all of us at Martins and More, thanks for listening.
Hear you later.